Okay folks, so here we are on the 30th of January 2024, and as we speak I have a 5800X3D in a van somewhere on its way to me. But before it arrives and we install it, I wanted to get some benchmarks down in my current 5600X. So we are currently on final approach into Bristol using the Pilot Plus scenery, and we are at around about 40 FPS at the moment. But if you look in the top right over there, you'll see just beneath the frame counter it tells us the component we're limited by, and that is the main thread, which is the CPU essentially. Again, if you look over to the stats on the left that are being generated by MSI Afterburner, so we've got two separate stat systems, left and right. The right is generated by the sim, the left is MSI Afterburner. Look at the GPU percentage usage there, it's about 59%, 62%, so around about, let's call it 60. So there's 40% more that the GPU could be doing, but it just isn't because the CPU won't allow it to go any faster. Hence we're capped at 40 FPS, and that is basically entirely by the CPU. So really curious to see if the 5800X3D improves things, and if so, by how much. Obviously sitting here now, I don't know the answer to that yet, so I'm kind of apprehensive given the money that we spent on it. But yeah, little bit of a cheat landing. We're getting the plane to do it, just so that we can then recreate it once we get the 5800X3D installed as well. So looking like we're holding fairly steady at around 40 FPS. We haven't had any crazy dips yet, and those would be shown in the 1% lows and the 0.1% lows. Those are the ones to watch really, because they give you an indication of the judderiness of the experience, because of course if you get a judder and it goes to like 3 FPS, well, you're probably going to see that in your 1% lows. So far so good. I'm obviously going to control the throttles when it comes time to touchdown, but other than that I'm going to let the plane do the rest of it, just so we can kind of get a like-for-like experience once we pop in the 5800X3D either later today or tomorrow. So 35, 34, it looks like it's starting to struggle a little bit more the closer we get to the airfield. But not much though. And we are running at 1080p with my recommended settings. I've got the train level of detail to 150. I'll link to the video with all the settings. Yeah, so it's starting to drop now. More like 30/29, 28.
100. 50. 40, 30, 20, 10,
down you go.
5.
That'll do. So here we are on approach into Gatwick. I've had the FPS stats running, so capturing the 1% lows ever since we captured the glide slope, and the nearer we're getting to Gatwick, the worse the performance is becoming. Here we are, dipping well down into the 20s, and look, we're limited by the main thread. The GPU is fine, not a problem from the GPU, but the CPU is not happy about that. Obviously this is quite a demanding airport, so we're going to let the plane land itself.
40, 30, 20, 10.
25-ish, 26, 27 FPS there as we touch down. So below the magical 30 FPS line, that's for sure. Alright folks, so we're about 1,000 feet out here at Melbourne in Australia. We're using the Orbx scenery, so again quite a detailed scenery pack, so I'm curious to see how the 5600X handles it. Obviously similar story to everything we've seen so far, GPU just chilling out 40-50%, and we are entirely limited by the performance of our processor, kind of around the 35-ish FPS mark. Obviously little dips here and there. Just curious to see what happens the nearer we get to touchdown. Yeah, so now we're into sort of mid to high 20s, quite similar to what we saw in Gatwick. And again, GPU, not a problem. It's all to do with that main thread, which is to say, our processor.
50, 40, 30, 20, 20, 10,
Yeah, so now we're sort of low 20s, low to mid 20s. All to do with that main thread. Alright, so I thought we would end at LAX in the Fenix A320. So we're hovering just above 30 FPS. This is quite an intense area. This is just the default LAX. This isn't like any payware add-on or anything like that. So you could argue, had we gone for a payware solution, we could be seeing, you know, less frames than we currently are. Because obviously, you could argue there's more detail in the payware scenery. Therefore, it's possible that the frames would go lower. But once again, same old story. GPU, 50-ish%. That's absolutely fine. It is the main thread. It's the processor that is preventing us from going any faster than we currently are. And just as we start getting closer to the airport, you can see now we're dipping down into the 20s. Similar story, wasn't it, to Melbourne? Similar story to Gatwick. Similar story to Bristol. Seems to be a bit of a theme here. Again, 30 FPS is kind of what I like to call the safe zone. If you get to 30 and you can maintain a locked 30, you can actually have quite a nice experience in flight sim. It's just when it starts to go below that, it starts to get a bit iffy quite quickly. So once again, we're doing an auto land just so we can recreate this once we get the 5800X 3D, and I'm really curious to see how much of an impact it's going to actually have. 25, ooh dear, yeah, that's not so great, is it? 28. Again, still limited by the main thread. GPU's totally fine. This is probably where it's going to start to struggle a little bit, I would imagine, the closer we get. Yeah, 25, 24.
100, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, retard.
And you go. Beautiful. Wow, okay. I don't know about you lot, but I'm impressed. 60 FPS is seeming fairly stable. We're in a Fenix A320. We're flying into Bristol using the Pilot Plus scenery. And we are there about 60 FPS. That is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. I didn't expect it to be that good. I thought maybe we'd be sort of low 50s. I mean, 60 FPS, that's the dream, right? If you're on an AM4 platform, i.e. if you've got a 5600X, 5800X, maybe a 3600X, maybe even older, it's very, very hard sitting here now. Obviously, this is the first test I've done. I haven't done the others yet.
1000.
But it seems very, very hard to not recommend this chip almost immediately, having just seen this. I mean, okay, fair enough, we're dropping down to sort of high 50s now, so we are beneath that 60 FPS, but then if you stick a 40 series card with it and whack frame gen on, I mean, that's pretty good, right? That is pretty good. It's weird, because going from a 5600X to a 5800X 3D, it doesn't feel like you're moving that far. I mean, I still had to drop 280 quid on it to get the upgrade. And it was like, yeah, but 5600 to 5800X 3D, the numbers, they're not changing that much. Is it really going to be worth it? Is it really going to change that much? And well, looking at this, yeah, kinda. Wow, that's remarkable. Absolutely staggered. My dilemma was, did I go for a 7800X 3D, or do I just whack in a 5800X 3D into what I've already got? And of course, this is the cheaper way out, because I can just put it into my motherboard, I can keep my RAM, I can maybe even sell my outgoing 5600X for 100 quid and get some money back that way. Or do you go for the 7800X 3D, you have to buy a new motherboard, new RAM, the whole platform with the CPU will cost you about 650 quid to do it right. Okay, so coming into land now, we're starting to get nearer the sort of mid to lowish 40, so it is dropping a little bit.
100.
Okay.
50. 40. 30. 20. 10. Retard.
Down you go. Wow, once again, we are almost flirting with 60 FPS here. I think the nearer we get to Gatwick, probably the lower it will go. That seems to be the general trend here. But mid-50s, occasionally you're seeing 57, 58. That's just remarkable. And this is at the freeware Gatwick in a PMDG 737. That's a heavy airplane for the sim, and as we all know, the freeware version of Gatwick has its own reputation of its own. It's known for being very demanding on systems. And these are numbers that I'm just not used to seeing at all. Generally, as I turn on to final, in the 5600X, there's always part of me that's like, oh, here we go. Here we go. This is where it's all going to start juddering away, and this is very good. Very, very good. And I think when you consider using maybe frame gen with this, obviously I'm on a 30 series GPU, 3070 at the time of recording. If you're going to go for a 40 series and use something like frame generation, I think frame generation gets all the better if you start from a higher FPS without it. So imagine if you got 20 FPS, you turn frame gen on, well, it's probably not going to be that great of an experience even still, because it only has those 20 frames to work with in the first instance, whereas if you give it 50, if you give it the high 40s rather than 27, 26, 28 that we've become accustomed to in the 5600X, I've got a funny feeling you're going to get a much, much better experience. 0.1% lows of 28 so far, that's really good. That's really good. You can judge so much just from those 1% lows, or 0.1% lows. Still above 40, look. Starting to see a couple of a few threes, but it's high threes, right? 38, 39, 40. Again, we'd be solidly in the 20s by this point if we had a 5600X installed.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Okay, so we're coming into Melbourne here. This is the Melbourne scenery from Orbx. So again, quite a demanding piece of scenery. You can see we're well into the 50 FPS here though. Sometimes dipping down into the 40s, but it seems to be sort of 50-ish, give or take. And again, we've been tracking the averages, 1% lows, 0.1% lows from an 8-mile final. Obviously, I'm just catching up with you now, so we're not just staring at an approach for ages and ages. And you can see the average is 54 from the beginning of the 8-mile final. So we are a little bit below that now, the nearer we get to the airfield. But this is very good. Very, very good compared to the 5600X. Be curious to see what a 7800X 3D would get. Like, how much better is it than a 5800X 3D?
300.
Is it in the lands of diminishing returns, or is it really another big step forward? So 40 FPS, so we're coming into land now.
100.
Right, here we go then.
50, 40, 30, 20. 10.
Down you go. Go on. There it is, bit of a float there from the auto land. FPS is dipping a little bit now, in fairness. We're definitely comfortably into the 30s. Thought I saw a 2 there at one point. But now we're comfortably back into the 40s. Well, I say the 40s. 40-ish. Once again, folks, kind of astonished. I mean, LA is a tough area. Not just the airport, it's the surrounding terrain, scenery, all of that stuff, and we're kind of high 40s, low 50s. Again, we're not beyond the magical 60 FPS, and even back in Bristol when we were seeing 60 FPS, we were sort of only flirting with it. So I think it's wrong to expect a solid 60 FPS out of this chip. But I think it gets you way beyond that 30 FPS limit. I don't think I've seen 30 FPS or anywhere near it come up yet. It may be that as we touch down, obviously the sim does lag sometimes, and I get the impression it doesn't matter what chip you have, you're going to get the occasional stutter. Occasionally. And I don't mind that as long as it is the occasional little blip as opposed to persistent bad performance, which is kind of what we were getting in the with the 5600X. So just so you know, all the averages, 1% lows, 0.1% lows, they have all been captured from the 8 mile mark. I'm using FSI panel to start us on an 8 mile short final, set the auto land on, and then just start the figures, tracking all the averages and all of that. Obviously I'm just catching up with you now as we come nearer to the airport for the sake of making it more of an entertaining video. So 40 FPS, just saw a 3 there, is it? Yeah, there we go, 38, 39, but again, it's not 28, it's not 26, which is what we were seeing the other day.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10, retard.
Down you go. There we go. So there is a little bit, it's almost like just as the wheels make contact with the ground, that ain't bad. That ain't bad. Let's jump off at this next little exit here. Yeah, mid-40s on the ground in LAX. I'm not complaining about that at all. So to wrap up, I guess we sort of have to say, first of all, what an upgrade. This has been a significant upgrade over the 5600X. Like I said, what's unclear to me is how much better than this is a 7800X 3D. So if any of you do have any information, if you do have a 7800X 3D, looking at you, Sid, if you're willing to share information in the comments, that would be really, really useful. So I think what we can take away from this is if you're expecting to get a solid locked 60 FPS experience from a 5800X 3D, it is not going to do that. It will sometimes get there. It will sometimes get quite close to it, but you can't expect 60 plus all the time. It's curious to me whether you were to go for a 40 series GPU and pair it with frame generation, whether that could get you over the line. I suspect it probably would, quite comfortably in fact. And then that kind of raises the question, well, if you're going to just put frame gen on a 5800X 3D and get well beyond 60, is there any point going for a 7800X 3D to then only put on frame gen as well? It's a different kind of question to answer, I suppose. If you're doing a brand new build, then yeah, it probably makes sense to go for the 7800X 3D. But if you're in a position like I am, where you already own an AM4 platform, I think that the question of is it worth going 7800X 3D weighs a lot heavier, because if you could potentially get 80% of the way there for half the money, then yeah, you sort of have to think about that. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you've got any further information or got any further questions. I'll be more than happy to answer those. There will be affiliate links in the description for the parts that I have, and of course the 5800X 3D from Amazon. Obviously no pressure. If you are genuinely in the market though, using those links does help out the channel a ton at no extra cost to you, so that's massively appreciated. Anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. Thank you so much for watching. Take the very best care of yourselves, and as always, happy flying.